Let's break the chain. Ladies and gentlemen, before we go any further, though, we're going to ask everyone to stand for the playing of the national anthem. I'm being told that we will be singing, all the better. So those of us who had some challenges last night on Marcus Garvey Drive will get a chance to wake up. The flag is right in my direction, if you are not aware. Eternal Father, bless our land. Guard us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil powers. Be our light through countless hours. To our leaders, great defender, grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Teach us true respect for all. Stir response to duty's call. Strengthen us the weak to cherish. Give us vision lest we perish. Knowledge send us, Heavenly Father. Grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. Castle Dunkley, Director of Investigations, to do the opening prayer.
Let us pray. Our God, Sovereign Father, King of Kings, and you are the Lord of all. We, your children, come before you this morning, and we thank you for life. We thank you for this wonderful opportunity that you have given unto us to serve Jamaica, land we love. As we gather here this morning to discuss matters pertaining to our country, Lord, and to get rid of corruption that is prevailing, we ask, Father, that you have given us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And we pray, Father, that as we come together, that collectively, oh God, we will discuss so that Jamaica can be a better place. Bless each and every one of us this morning, including the moderator. Have thine own way. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Reverend Dunkley. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that Jamaica Customs is hosting this panel discussion this morning, it is an acknowledgement that corruption is an issue. And by saying it's an issue, we're not saying that's an issue only at Jamaica Customs. It's an acknowledgement that corruption is an international challenge. It's a national challenge that we're all aware of. And Jamaica Customs is determined as an entity of the government of Jamaica to do our part in combating corruption within our sphere. But we acknowledge that we need the support and the engagement of our stakeholders to accomplish that goal. And that goal is an organization where integrity is the dominant character, the dominant value that exists. And so this morning, I would like to acknowledge the esteemed members of our panel and our specially invited guests and stakeholders. To my immediate right is no stranger to any of us. She is the hostess, the Commissioner of Customs, Mrs. Verma Ricketts Walker. Next to her, we have Mr. Dirk Harrison. He is the Director of the Corruption Prosecution Division of the Integrity Commission, formerly the Office of the Contractor General. We have beside Mr. Harrison, Mr. Robin Sykes. Mr. Sykes is the Chief Technical Director of the Financial Investigations Division of the Ministry of Finance and Planning. Next to him, we have Castle is a little further down. We have Mr. Cranston Morgan, who is the Acting Commissioner, Revenue Protection Division. And the other persons, I don't have to look at my paper to do the introduction. Next to him, we just heard from him, Mr. Castle Dunkley. He is the Director of Investigations at Jamaica Customs. And over the last few weeks, he has been overseeing the Internal Affairs Division in the absence of its Director, Miss Tamika Goldburn. Next to him, we have Mr. O'Neill Martin. He is the Director of Risk Management at Jamaica Customs. Seated to his right, we have Miss Michelle Chambers. And Miss Chambers is the Director of our Internal Audit Unit. And the next fair lady beside her is Mrs. Janice Tullo Walker. And she's the Director of our Post-Audit and Compliance Unit. The gentleman that is balancing out the commissioner on the other side of the table is one of her, I don't know if it's a right or a left hand, because the other deputy commissioner is also here. Mr. Marlon Lowe, who is the acting deputy commissioner of operations at Jamaica Customs Agency. We have on the other side of the table, Assistant Commissioner Fitz Bailey, and he's a commanding officer in charge of CTOC. And we have sitting in the audience our Deputy Commissioner of Border Protection, Mr. Alwyn Nicely. We have at the table as well Mrs. Selena Clark Graham. She is a Senior Director of Kingston Operation, also called our Collector of Customs. Ladies and gentlemen, we have several other stakeholders here, and because we are live streaming, and I'll tell you more about it, we are not at liberty to go through all of them. But we have representatives from the Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association of Jamaica, through the president, Mrs. Mitzi Gordon Burke Green, and she have other members of the association who are also representing. We have representatives from the Port Authority of Jamaica, Captain Sidney Ennis, Vice President of Security and Safety. We have representatives from Adolph Levy, Kingston Wharves, in the form of Ms. Valerie Campbell. And we have representatives from, I say from MOCA, I'm not seeing Assistant Commissioner Millicent Sproul, but she is on the list. I guess we're expecting her. And we have representatives from the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, the Jamaica Small Business Association, and we have other stakeholders and members of the management team and staff of Jamaica Customs Agency present here. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome for me the panelists for this morning's panel discussion. But before we get into the panel discussion, we're going to have remarks from three very esteemed individuals this morning, and it is no surprise that we are starting with the Commissioner of Customs, Mrs. Verma Ricketts Walker, to give us her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. And good morning, everyone. Yes, I realize based on the introduction done by our moderator that there's no need for me to go back over that. You will agree, right? So we are all introduced. So if you recall our national anthem that we just sung, there's a line in it that says, justice, truth be ours forever. And within that, the reflection of how we treat with corruption issues is also telling as well. I want you to just allow me as I go through my remarks, because I feel that it is necessary for me to just set the tone as to how corruption is seen within the Jamaica Customs Agency. All right, I need this mic a little bit. Yeah. You're kind of on the shorter side. All right, so the Jamaica Customs Agency has been making focused efforts in its anti-corruption mandate, which requires a holistic approach. You, our valued stakeholders, are fundamental to this process, and as such, we truly appreciate your taking the time out to be a part of this panel discussion today. The fight against corruption remains an important task and one we intend to win. Again, one we intend to win. Team Customs, one we intend to win. We are aware that no country is immune to corruption, and the moderator spoke about that. And that corruption serves only to impede reform and modernization and development efforts, particularly for customs. Now, because of the scope, nature, and complexity of our work, customs administration are particularly susceptible to corruption. And we intend to change that in areas, and we continue as it relates to all the trade facilitation measures in terms of simplification, harmonization, and standardization. So to put the term corruption into context, for an act to be considered corrupt, it usually needs to be involved in the contravention of public duty, the receipt of some form of improper inducement, and to occur in an environment of secrecy, or at least without official sanction. Normally, the three broad categories of corruptions exist. And I will look at it in the context of what I would call routine corruption, in which private operators pay bribes to obtain a normal or hastened completion of customs operations. So if it is that we're not operating within the speed and efficiency needed, that too can contribute to corruption. Fraudulent corruption, in which the trader or agent seeks a blind eye or an active collusion or collusive customs treatment in order to reduce fiscal obligations or enlarge external earnings. And another, criminal corruption, in which criminal operators pay bribes to permit a total illegal, lucrative operation, and I talk about drug trafficking or abuse of incentives. So what is Jamaica Customs doing to break the chain of corruption? We have established a 360-degree or a holistic approach within our anti-corruption strategy, anchored on the foundation of integrity development and maintenance. We recognize that integrity as a building block is critical. Integrity emphasizes that the fight against corruption, the safeguarding of integrity, and the enhancement of good governance measures are critical to a modern, efficient, and effective customs administration. These building blocks, however, rely on a holistic and robust training and integrity enhancement approach, as well as an organization culture supporting high levels of integrity, demonstrating consistency, transparency, honesty, and fairness. And so it begs a question, what exactly do we refer to as integrity? Because a lot of times, we all have our own definitions. So permit me, a positive set of attitudes which foster honest and ethical behavior and work practices. We recognize that this needs to be supported by strong organizational culture within the strategic plan, and have used international best practices, particularly from the entity that we report to internationally, which is the World Customs Organization, to help us in that regard. Against this background, we have adopted the 10 elements outlined within the WCO. When I speak about WCO, I mean the World Customs Organization, revised Arusha Declaration, which provides the most practical basis for the development and implementation of a range of integrity and anti-corruption strategies relevant to customs operation. And these are embedded within our strategic plan. They are leadership and commitment. And so we have a zero tolerance approach. Regulatory framework, ensuring that we effectively utilize the Staff Orders, the Executive Agency Act, the FAA, the Customs Act, and all other public administration act that guides us in the way we operate. Transparency, which speaks to greater visibility. Audit trails. Automation. We have in our system ASICUDA, which allows for, again, visibility, transparency, and audit trail. So we're driving automation. We're driving that for greater efficiency. We're driving that in the context of reform and modernization, which is ongoing. Another element is audit and investigation. And we have an established assurance mechanism, but everything is work in progress. So we have internal audit, we have internal affairs, we have investigation unit. A code of conduct is in place. Our human resource management in terms of refining recruitment and rotation policy. And within any system, who you bring in your organization by way of recruitment are the same persons who can affect you as it relates to corruption. And so you have to ensure that those things are dealt with. And the moral and organizational culture is important as well. But one of the main important element is relationship with our private sector and stakeholder. And so several means of engagement continues. This is another one. So the strategic plan for anti-corruption, the framework, is embedded under 4 main pillars. And that speaks to raising awareness and education, sensitization, if you want to call it that, prevention, detection, prosecution tied to sanction. The framework and actionable strategies see us well positioned on the battlefield in the fight against corruption. We intend to break the chain. In addition to the WCO framework, we at the JC has instituted an anti-corruption committee chaired by none other Mr. Robin Sykes. Mr. Robin Sykes? Okay. Yes. Which includes internal and external stakeholders from both private and public sector. I've said some amount, but I want again to say thank you for the participation that I expect you to have here, and for us to have a meaningful and productive forum, which will redound in us identifying solutions to the issue of corruption. It's a fight we intend to win, and we intend to break the chain. Thank you all for your valuable contribution.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, I did mention in my opening remarks that today's discussions are being streamed live via GIS. And so, Smile, you're on candid camera. It's been streamed via GIS online media channels, via GIS website, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So you are being beamed all across the world as we speak. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would like to invite Mr. Dirk Harrison to bring remarks.
Good morning, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Almost 1 year ago, I sought to bring some goods into Jamaica. I shared it with the Commissioner, I think almost a year ago. And when I was told to pay $800,000 cash by the particular customs broker, I slipped into a room, I called RPD, I called MOCA. By the time they got to the particular berth, the persons had disappeared. I probably was not as nimble on my feet as I should have been then to confiscate that document that had been prepared, which had not gone through the Prosecution, I think, system. When I told them at that place, start this process right over, I am not paying anybody any cash. I am paying by manager's check. I think everybody got scared, and probably with all the calls I made, by the time the authorities got to that berth, everybody was gone. But I just say that when we speak about corruption, Trans International defines it as the abuse of public office for private gain. No one is immune. I said to the particular lady, do you know who I am? I am the Contractor General. The response was, you don't want to pay some money to get what you want? That is when I realized we are in a deep hole. And that is when I made those important calls. Commissioner, I thank you for inviting me here today. I just have a few remarks, but I thought it important to share that short story because I think it's important for us to recognize something that we all know. The persons who are prepared to offer or to engage in corruption, they don't care who is on the other end. And obviously, if persons decide to engage them, you must recognize that you're going to lose your reputation, your freedom, and probably most importantly, your reputation. So I think ultimately we need to recognize that there are consequences of getting involved, and the consequences are harsh. But I just wish to share with you some comments, Commissioner, audience, and I want to commend once again, Commissioner, for taking the lead. This is the second year in running, I would say you have taken the lead, and I think I know I received something recently that you're even thinking of ahead of International Anti-Corruption Day, so I must commend you for taking the lead because that is very, very important. But not meaning to be controversial, but I think I just want to be as complete as possible. If you want to start talking about corruption, I may be wrong, but I still have not seen the figures. What is the true cost of the loss of corrupt activities at customs? I don't know if it is documented somewhere, but I would like to see that figure. Why would I like to see that figure? That for me is a starting point. Before we can start and have all these nice meetings and speak about what we're going to do, we need to know what the problem is. So what is the extent of the problem? What is the extent of that monetary value that is being lost by the revenue each year? Having determined that figure, let us admit it. It is 10 million Jamaican. It is 20 million. Then we can move to strategies. Identify the problem. Where are the problems? Who are the people? Then we move by step procedure. Now, you may know the figures. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. But I would just say in terms of a meaningful way of starting to address the problem, you need to know the extent of the problem. So I would start first. My first point is to measure it, have a measuring stick. Need to identify then who are the stakeholders. Not the stakeholders in this room, but the stakeholders who are persons who are willing to abuse public office and offer to someone else for private gain something, whether it is another public official or someone else. So having determined these two things, what we need to do and ensure is that we have the requisite skill set to monitor these things. We need to have the requisite skill sets of persons to be employed who undergo a rigorous system of training and employment to be in the system to track these things. Mr. Bailey, ACP Bailey is here. They have quite a bit of skill set in terms of CTOC. They get the skill set. You have to find the persons who can tackle the monster. So having done that, I need us to face a fact. It is something I've said for a number of years, but I think it's something that I keep repeating, and I will keep repeating it. There's a prosecution fallacy. And the fallacy is, because there's an allegation against somebody of corruption, because that person is charged, it means a person will be convicted. That is a fallacy. Not because there's an allegation, not because somebody is charged, it does not mean it will mean a conviction. But we in this room need to ensure we do the requisite proper training of the persons, proper investigation, proper collection of exhibits, putting together a proper file, and placing it before the court system. The mere fact that an allegation is made, it doesn't mean that the person is guilty. There must be proof. So the prosecution fallacy, I repeat, the mere fact that there's an allegation and that somebody is charged, it does not mean there will be a conviction. And we need to ensure that the system, the stakeholders, are all well-oiled in terms of ensuring that we achieve the goal to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So I commend, in my short remarks, once again, the Commissioner. I commend the need for us to have these partnerships with all stakeholders. And I dare say that we must admit another fact. Corruption will never be eradicated. We can control it. We can ensure that we prevent certain things. It will never go. So how do we ensure that we have this capsule, and that's what I spoke of, determine the problem, find the source, and try to tackle and contain it? Because people will continue to find ways to beat the system. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I say that we must commend also the FID and Mr. Robin Sykes, because we can see, based on what has been happening for the last few years, they are going after the money. We commend also CTOC. ACP Bailey is here in terms of the successes they have had. This is the way to go after the proceeds of crime. But we need to ensure that all of us are on the same page. We need to ensure that we all work together. And I just share with you a comment that was the tagline for the Office of the Contractor General. It was, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. I want to commend you, Commissioner, on this initiative, and thank you very much for allowing me a few remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a presentation from Assistant Commissioner Fitzbailey.
I will follow the protocol that has already been established. So I just want to recognize our commissioner. I am not Donald Trump. As a preacher, and Selena will know that, I do not normally stick to my script. And coming here today and listening to the conversation, I don't know if I'll stick directly to my script. There is let me commend you for this initiative. I think we need more of this within government and right across Jamaica. because corruption is a real issue, a real problem that impacts on every citizen in this country. Some years ago, I was doing a presentation, a fraud presentation, and I came across something which suggests that 20% of all people are dishonest. 20% of all people are dishonest. 20% of all people are honest. So 60% is neither honest nor dishonest. And so the propensity exists for 80% of the population to be dishonest. And what is important is that we have to create that culture and that environment that will prevent the 60% that is neither honest nor dishonest to be honest. And so it is important that we look at some issues. And this is not on my script, but I'll go into my script. The reality is that we have to look at the condition of service for the men and women that work with us. The condition of service can influence the direction they go. You know, I went on the internet and I was trying to look at the salary of senior executives in government. And when I came upon the salary of the persons who work within the offices of the Director of Public Prosecution, I was stunned. I never knew. And I called to verify if what I saw was correct. And that led me to come to the conclusion that it is important that we create the environment in terms of condition of service to dissuade those who are inherently honest or those who are not, the 60% that are not either honest or dishonest, to create that culture that they can be honest. Now, corruption robs us all. And as your theme said, it is important that we break the chain and discontinue this unethical practice. The idea of corruption may be misconstrued by the populace. It may be a misnomer, a word that is considered to only involve bribes or monetary exchange. How often have you mentioned the word, beg your oblige, or boss me, no? You ever hear that expression, boss me? Are these requests indicative of nepotism, true friendship, or actually a corrupt practice? I leave that for your thinking, for your reflection. Corruption is defined by the Oxford Dictionary, specifically mention dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. It is further considered by Transparent International to be the abuse of entrusted power for private gain, which eventually hurt everyone who depends on the integrity of people in a position of authority. This definition is more in line with the theme for this conference, and we certainly must break the chain, using all effective employable means and incorporating all stakeholders in this perennial combat. Like many other human behaviors, corruption is learned. Corruption occurs on a continuum. It is not a single act that's disappeared over time. It engenders greed, thereby creating a culture of its own. It becomes a lifestyle, a habit that grows with practice and possible with opulence. Corruption remains a global challenge. The 2007 Corruption Index assessed 180 territories and ascribing a score of 0 to 100, where 0 indicates high level of corruption and 100 being very clean. Jamaica scored 44 and was ranked 68 out of 180 territories. We can praise ourselves because we saw an improvement over the previous years, coming from a low of 38. Other Caribbean territories such as Panama, Cuba, Dominica, Canada, and Bahamas are viewed as closer to the zero mark than Jamaica. The United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Switzerland, Germany, and Japan were ranked among the top 20 of the 180 territories. The question is, why can't we be better than Cuba, Dominica, Grenada, and Bahamas? This statistic now demands a full explanation of the nature of corruption. Research has indicated that the most corrupt countries had little or no protection for a number of institutions, including the press, non-governmental organizations. Fortunately for us in Jamaica, we have protection. The press is protected, NGOs. And the question is, why do we have this high level of corruption if we have those protections in place? Corruption requires a culture of silence to bloom. It demands secrecy, and it cannot survive in an environment where we accept the concept of whistleblowing. In other words, we need to talk about corruption. We need to tell it as we see it. In reality, like many other concepts, the epistemology and ontology of a subject are seldom similar. This means the way we know of corruption is potentially different from what corruption truly is. And sometimes we define corruption based on where we are in life. So corruption for the rich is different from corruption for the poor. Corruption for law enforcement officers is different from other entity. And if it is done by other entity, it's not corruption, it is something else. But if it is done by law enforcement officer, it is corruption. We need to be consistent in our definition of corruption. We can look at the various types of corruption. Corruption in judiciary, delayed justice, selective justice. Rich and famous are given preferential treatment. This does not only happen within the judiciary, but it happens within law enforcement and investigative body, where we are very selective in the way we do investigation. The influential tends not to be reached, but the ordinary persons are prosecuted. So we are very selective and we are influenced by people's status. Voluntary harassment, targeted judgment based on affiliation or association. If you and I belong to the same church, or you and I belong to the same social club, or you and I belong to the same secret organization, then we tend not to be balancing the way we dispense justice. That's corruption. Then we can talk about business corruption, corrupt practices to generate more income. Tax evasion. I'm not the expert. There's a distinction between avoidance and evasion. We don't know. But we do everything not to pay our taxes. Corruption in government. Mr. Harris would know much more about that than me. Award of contracts. We see it every day. And we have become tolerant to these type of conducts and behavior. Nepotism. I'm not a politician, so I don't want to go into that. But you see it right across government. Nepotism. People who are placed in position without the requisite qualification, but because of their connection, family connection, etc. It happens within government. Then we talk about the buying of votes. Those are right across. Corruption in law enforcement, which is the topical issue. Custom, law enforcement body. We get a lot of beating. But what we need to do is to ensure that we create an environment that is resistant to corruption. And critical to those are the processes that we have. If you don't have proper processes and systems, you will expose your organization to all type of corruption. And those processes and systems must be continuously reviewed. And when there are system breaches, then the requisite punishment must be meted out or sanctioned. It's very important. That will basically create an environment that is against corruption. And we could go into the whole other organization, education. We don't call some things corruption, but they are corrupt. If because I know you and you can offer sexual favor, I'll allow you to pass your exam and give you your certification. If I can allow you and you can offer sexual favor, I give you a promotion in the work environment. These are corruption, and we must take a stance against these things. Administrative corruption, which is one we don't pay attention to. It creates loss to the public. Corporations acquire resources for a specific cause and then alter the objective once obtaining the rights to the resources. So it's basically a false representation that is made. We don't treat it as corruption. Those of us facilitating and sabotaging of cases and investigations, these are applicable to us as law enforcement bodies. Paying off officials for preferential treatment, contract or favor. So it is important that we understand that corruption is very wide. It's not about bribery. It's not about the man who is doing a traffic ticket and somebody offers him something and he accepts it and we say, yeah, that's corruption. That's low level. But we have to attack corruption from every level. It doesn't matter who you are. So corruption in due course robs us of our lives, freedom, health, and money. Corruption disseminates political will, democracy, and legitimacy of government, offices, and officials. The mere association with corrupt acts is enough to destroy political reputation. Corruption also extends major cost and further destroy our economy, social and environmental sectors. I looked at a reading and it said corruption globally is about $1.6 trillion between one, maybe it's more than that. And that is a dated figure about 2014, somewhere around that. $1.6 trillion. Let me just finish. I was told I had 15 minutes. I don't know if I've exhausted my 15 minutes, but let me just finish. Government and wider societies suffer because of corrupt activities, where politicians indulge in misusing resources and funding for private advantage. The investment of scarce resources into the highly demanding and expensive projects are opposed to more critical and needed infrastructure, depletes national wealth. Sustainable road network, proper health care, and other obligatory infrastructure become non-existent as corrupt practices increase. Think about the amount of money that are lost each year for persons who fail to pay their taxes. Whilst the PAYE, like you and I, we have no choice. We have no choice, we have to pay. So we have to forge that partnership and that relationship to ensure that corruption is minimized, corruption is reduced. Think about the impact that corruption, monies that are lost to corruption could have on our education system. As a person who is involved in gang investigation, one of our major challenges is that a lot of these gangsters are unable to read and write. They have not been exposed to the educational system that is necessary. Think about the amount of money that could be pumped into early childhood education to set the foundation for our children. Corruption affects every fiber of society. And it is important, I'm not going to finish my notes. It is important that all of us, irrespective of where we are, we must be ambassadors. Ambassadors. As a man of the cloth, I understand the concept of evangelism. And the concept of evangelism is that each one teach one. So you go and you gossip the gospel, you share it. When Jesus was around, he called 2 and 2, and he said, you go 2 by 2 or 3, and you go and you share it. We have to go and become ambassadors of this change, to say to society, if we allow corruption to continue to thrive, it's going to destroy our economy, it's going to destroy our country, our reputation, and the potential for investment will be reduced. I want to say thank you again for this conference, and this is a step in the right direction. And in whatever way we can assist in the process at CTAC and as a JCF, we are willing to support the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, ACP Bailey. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what we call frank discussion, right? And we've been having that this morning, started with the Commissioner and with Mr. Harrison, and continued with ACP Bailey. But we want to take that frank discussion a bit further. And so we're through with the presentations, and so what we're going to get into now is the actual panel discussion. I'm looking around the room, and I'm seeing quite a bit of stakeholders, and I'm seeing a fair number of also internal stakeholders. And what we are hoping for this morning is for your full engagement. So remember, it's a proxy representation this morning, because the room is small, and so we couldn't have invited everybody that we would have wanted to invite. And so because we're streaming live, it means that you are representing all the persons who are watching online now and have questions that they would have liked to ask. It means that you have to be frank enough to ask those questions of the panelists and to have them addressed at this time. So at this time, we have some microphones available for the panelists and for the stakeholders who will be asking the questions. And if you don't ask the questions this morning, what will happen is that you'll force me into a situation where I'm the only person that will get my questions answered. And I don't think that was the intention this morning. But before I throw it open to you, I say some of our panelists wouldn't have had a chance this morning to make a presentation or given remarks. And so I'm going to throw it out there, particularly for Mr. Sykes from from FID and Cranston from RPD to kind of take 1 minute to elaborate on the role of the FID and RPD generally, and specifically as it relates to the fight against corruption.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, Commissioner, for the kind invitation. From the FID's perspective, the FID, of course, focuses on financial crime and money laundering in particular, but you'd appreciate that most significant crime, and certainly crimes of corruption. One of the fundamental aspirations of the division, together with our partners at CTAC, is to take the money out of crime using the powers granted to us under statute. So we follow very closely and collaborate with MOCA, JCF, RPD, Customs on these cases, with the intention and particular focus on taking the profit out of crime, whether it's upon conviction or if cases, as Dirk has pointed out, some cases don't reach the level that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But that doesn't mean that we stop. We have had a lot of success in terms of cases where we go the civil route, where there's a lower burden of proof, and we have taken assets in those situations. There's very versatile powers under our statutes to pursue the profits of crime. One thing I want to point out is that we feel sometimes that we're sort of drowning in corruption, and there is multiple examples of that. But we need to remember too that there are great officers out there. One of our cases before the court, I don't know if it is, maybe Dirk can tell me if it's sub judice, to mention it. A case where CTOC officers on operation, the guy comes with 2 bags, 18 million. Those people are before the courts because those officers were willing to say, we're not going to do it. I'm going to put you before the courts. So we have to remember that integrity is there. There are bad apples in the bunch, but there are lots of hardworking men and women that really do want to stand up for integrity and take a stance against corruption. We believe that a lot of the cases that we're working on, some cases that Mr. Harrison has initiated involving public servants, these are going to make a statement when they're brought to trial and they're already in the courts to show the public what public servants can get up to if they're not monitored properly. Talk about opulence. There's a gentleman that rumor has it that his bathroom door open using his iPad. There is an opulence and disregard that has to be slapped down. And we at this table all have to step up. It's a dirty, messy issue that all of us, we cannot proceed with it without getting our hands dirty. We have to come to that realization. And that is, I believe, something that we all have to work together. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Commissioner, I want to thank you for inviting the RPD to this panel. And I appreciate the fact that you, as the head of the organization, you're actually setting the tone at the top. I think that's important for any organization to address issues of organizational culture. In the past, I think Customs has focused mainly or predominantly on trade facilitation, sometimes to the detriment of border protection and these anti-corruption issues. So it's refreshing to see that we're facing this monster head on and willing to talk about it. The RPD is a very storied institution. We've been around for some time. Started back in the 90s. Primarily started because of the corruption, whether perceived or real, that existed or exists in customs. And the role has been expanded. So we not only look at customs, but other entities that interact with the revenue, such as the tax administration. One of the things that was spoken about earlier was the staffing of these entities, well, specifically customs. The RPD, as part of its mandate, does background checks or vetting of employees or prospective employees of these organizations. And I must say that the statistics are showing that trending towards a lower amount of issues or a lower number of issues coming forward. It used to be at around 20% of those we vetted that there were issues with. For the last year ending September 30, it's down to 11%. So trending in the right direction, at least for those coming in, which I think is a good thing. We also interact with customs at other levels. For example, we spoke about the anti-corruption committee, where we're a part of that. We sit on the anti-corruption committee. We sit on the custom brokers licensing advisory board to ensure that those coming to the profession are of a certain standard. We look at the facilities that customs operates in to ensure that those facilities and the processes and procedures employed there are efficient and do not, because of inefficiency, lead to persons attempting to corrupt officers. Right? So we, along with we partner with the JCA in trying to clean up this mess, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open, and we will take your questions to the panelists now. So, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and the microphone will be passed to you. And remember, we are a small, intimate group, and so I'm sure you have questions that are buzzing at the top of your head. They should get to your lip by now. So let us see the hands going up. If you have questions for any of the panelists, those who are at JCA and those who are representing our other stakeholders. It's not every day that you get a panel like this together with heads of all of these agencies that are involved in a very critical fight against corruption in Jamaica and in the public service. So let us pick the brain, let us utilize the experience and the resource that comes with these panelists. Questions?
Thanks, Mr. Henry. All right, so coming from the presentation, particularly from Mr. Harrison, was the issue relating to the cost of corruption. And we would have heard ACP mention about the global cost. But as it relates to our national cost, I'm not sure if that's a figure that we know. And so it is important for us as custom to even have an understanding of, when we speak about corruption, what is that gap? What is that cost? And again, in terms of the measure, I know that Chairman Sykes have some reservation as it relates to how we move towards measuring corruption, and that is something that we need to further ventilate. But it is important that where the resources is there to guide, and any suggestions that the members here have, that be also be mentioned, because we want to be in a position where we're putting forward solutions to deal with this matter that we call, or this issue that we call corruption. Mr. Harrison spoke about determining the problem, right? So most times, even in the minds, is that corruption is more a perception, but the reality is also there. And a lot of times we are more about talk without having the real evidence to back it up. So we want to get the information so that we can be in a clearer position, as we move towards corruption. If we look at it from, let's say, as it relates to our own revenue intake, the revenue has been doing well. But does that mean that there isn't any corruption? I don't think so, right? And if the revenue is not doing well, does that mean that it is because there's a lot of corruption? May not be so. But so we really need to have a true determination of what is it we're talking about.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have a question for the panel? So it seems that at least for the time. Thank you very much. The microphone is coming to you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Hazelyn Brown, and I'm a customs broker. I really don't have a specific question, but it's a general. I'm going to speak generally here. There's what we call a code of silence in Jamaica, because I have had situation where if you complain, if you call, if you write. The minute you do that, you become a target of, I'm not speaking specifically of customs, I'm speaking generally. We all sit here, but we also must remember that we live in a small society, a society of crime and violence. And persons have to understand that sometimes when you speak, you become a target, not just you alone, your family, your kids, or anyone that is associated with you. So when we speak here, there is generally a code of silence. And I personally, I have made complaints that it's related, not made complaint, but I have stood up and I've spoken my mind, and then I become the target the next day as it relates to what I do. And that is where I'm clear, and that is why a lot of persons won't, and they stay under what we call a code of silence. And that's a general statement, not necessarily for Commissioner, but generally speaking.
Thank you. Any of the panelists would like to address those comments? Mr. Lowe?
I think one of the ways we have to deal with that is to just ensure, as ACP has said, that we create an environment where it is against corrupt activities, right? Which is to ensure that the processes are simple, they're efficient, and so that you don't have to get those complaints, right? And trade facilitation and border enforcement are the same side of the coin, for that matter, right? They are not different. So we have to facilitate the trade, make it simple, efficient, while at the same time doing the enforcement. Introduce technology, reduce personal interaction and stuff like that. And the more that happen, things like those happen, the less interaction, the less need for it to complain, then the less we'll have that. But also, we have to be strong enough to deal with the complaints in such a manner so that the repercussion that you're speaking of, you do not get that. And if we are aware, then we are able to deal with that. It's a chicken and egg situation, because if you remain silent, then chances are we will not be able to fix it, right? So you have to also have some confidence in us to have that resilience to deal with the problem and deal with those persons who are complaining.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison?
Go
ahead, Janice.
Just to add to what Marlon said as well, ACP Bailey also said we are to be ambassadors. And if we all become ambassadors and don't accept to be this code of silence, then we'll all help in the situation. But if we if we just sit back and just accept the code of silence, then it will not be broken.
Thank you, Mrs. Tolo Walker. Mr. Harrison?
I can understand what was just said. And I will sit beside you now and say that it's easy for all of us on this side of the table to say that you should volunteer and feel comfortable. That's so easy to say. It's so easy for any of us here, because any one of us here is more likely to get police protection in 5 minutes than somebody else who is not in one of these positions. So what I know that we have done last year, Christmas, the Customs Commissioner, RPD, and FID, and then what was then the Office of the Contractor, and we went into the prisons. We went to all the 4 juvenile institutions and engaged the young people. We knew that they couldn't come to us, so we went to them. The year before, we had other engagements where we all partnered, and something that we were doing as partners, and commending the Commissioner in terms of taking the lead now. But I'm answering your question, in what we need to do is change the focus. The focus is engaging the young people and letting them change the dialogue. And the dialogue is stop saying in form of a dead, in form of a live. And if we try to build, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years. Jamaica, we can't change anything. If we're foolish to think this meeting is going to make a change tomorrow, it won't. It's going to take us 5-10 years, if just using an arbitrary figure. But it is starting a dialogue of engaging the young people everywhere. And we need something every year doing it informer to live. And that's one way to build it. And I'm not answering you directly, but I'm just saying we want to encourage persons, but the only way we have to do it is a holistic way where we're engaging everybody, that they must appreciate that what is happening is wrong. So engagement of the young people must be paramount in anything that is being done. It is not about convictions, which is very important. It's the engagement of the youth.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. ACP.
I have been a member of the JCF for 34 years. Before I joined JCF, I was accustomed to hearing of police killing people. And we have been looking at the rate of fatal shooting over a period of time. You have sometimes it increased, but it seems as if the more the people are so-called criminals are killed. Have you ever seen like teenager roach when you spray them with beer gun and they disappear and then they just come up again with it? And that's how it has been. The point I want to raise is that there's something that we just can't arrest our way out of. We can't arrest our way out of corruption. Just to reinforce what Mr. Harris said. It's a whole concept of changing the mindset, focusing on the young people. And if we continue to be ambassador, one man, if I can convince somebody, and you convince one person, and you get them on board, and that person convince another person, it's going to take a lot of time and effort, but we have to start. The level of the informer for death culture, it didn't begin just overnight, you know. It started when people started to turn a blind eye to what they saw. And then it emboldened the criminals. And after a while, they become so emboldened and start to intimidate people. If we had this system where we demonstrate an intolerance for corruption, for violence, everything, Jamaica would not have reached where it is. So we have to collectively now go on this mission to reverse it. That's important.
Thank you, ACP Bailey. Mr. Brown.
Right. I agree with Marlon and the others before that spoke about processes that must be in place to ensure that corruption doesn't find a place to breed. But we accept that there's corruption, and we accept that we live in a violent society. And it's for that reason that the JCF, as well as the RPD, we have associations with Crime Stop Jamaica, where persons can call anonymously, leave the information, and we will investigate.
Certainly, Mr. Sykes.
I just wanted to add that the elements of this problem are just so multifaceted, it's not funny. But the reality too is that I just want to contribute. One thing that's critical in this scenario is also a more effective court system. If cases could move through the courts more speedily, if persons who are facing being a witness if that person doesn't have to contemplate 5 years for this case to reach trial. You know, if we had a system that was more efficient, that defense counsel would see the level of evidence against a complainant and decide to accept a plea. These are some of the building blocks that are necessary to change the culture. And my final point is that also what I've also seen as well is that sometimes the sentiment about being afraid is just, I'm not trivializing it, I'm not minimizing it, but people don't necessarily consider what the real risk is. You know, I've had cases where someone who is going to give a technical statement about did X or Y happen. You know, it's not, I'm not saying that you did this or you did that. I'm just saying, did a fact occur? Very simple statement. They're not doing it. They're not doing it. And in my, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to say there's no risk, but the reality is that everybody is having a hands-off attitude, and that just cannot. It's the JCF and the Ministry of National Security cannot protect every single witness who goes to court. People have to stand up and take a stand on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sykes. Ladies and gentlemen, I come to you, Commissioner. I'm going to encourage you, if you don't want to ask your questions via the microphone, you may write it down. There are strips of paper being passed around, so you please feel free to write your questions and to pass them to me. I'll be more than happy to ask the questions on your behalf. And Mrs. Burke-Green, I have not forgotten you. As soon as the panelists have finished weighing in, I will come back to you. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. All right, so I want to go back to what Mrs. Aislinn Brown. Am I married you off, Mrs. Aislinn? Brown mentioned. And that has to do with having standing up, feeling as if nothing is really being done, or feeling somewhat victimized. Am I correct? Yes. And it says to me that there is indeed more that we can do within the organization, because there are some who will not say, but the ones that do say should get redress. And they should see us moving aggressively to deal with that. And that should serve as an example to the others. And so that's something that we have to look into more carefully, Ms. Brown, as we try to demonstrate that we are an organization that has no tolerance for any form of corrupt activities or any activity that may lead to corruption. All right.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mrs. Green, you have a microphone around there? No?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mitzi Gordon Burke-Green, President of the Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association. First, we want to say congratulations to Commissioner and her team for this initiative. It is significant because what we don't understand is that corruption, while persons look at the personal gain, it affects our nation, our beloved Jamaica, significantly. The concern raised by our member, Ms. Brown, is real, and the question that I wanted to ask, I know we spoke of the simplification of the processes, and we spoke of Asicoda going electronic. What sort of, and we spoke of the environment to engender persons reporting. What is it that Customs is looking at, specifically as it relates to improving of the processes, as well as what sort of environment? How am I going to be comfortable? And it's not just brokers, but your external stakeholders. How will we be comfortable that if a concern is raised, then it will be seen through without the fear of being victimized?
And I think this is an opportunity for as many of our custom panelists to jump in and to give their take in responding to Mrs. Burke-Green. Commissioner, anytime you want to jump first, you are allowed.
All right, so let's speak about processes. And it is important that the processes are standardized. And you would know, based on being a part of our own, a lot of our committees that are involved in engagement, is that we are on a mission to just have an overall standardization of all our processes. And so we are working on that. We also are pushing towards being ISO 9001 2015 getting that international accreditation, and that is as it relates to quality standards across the organization. Now, that is something that is huge because no other customs administration, save and except probably one globally, has that certification. And we are pushing for that because we are serious that if it is that we have the level of standardization to allow for certainty, to allow for predictability and transparency, that will help us a great deal, not just for our stakeholders or our customers, but for our staff that has to deal with these standards. You would have had complaints in the past as the head of the broker association that in terms of certain standards, you would have had to have gone to Montego Bay and experience a somewhat different standard than what you would have experienced in Montego Bay. In Kingston, sorry. Well, it seems like Montego Bay is now Jamaica, right? Because one time Kingston is Jamaica. But nonetheless, we are working on that. I think Asikudo, as an automated platform in customs, has also helped with the standardization because it forces us to operate within one single electronic environment. So that is good for us. We want to ensure that not only our own team members as staff are compliant with our rules, but we want to ensure that the intermedium, which you form that big part of, also ensures that the importers or exporters also comply with our rules. So it's also important that that chain that we speak about is not just a customs chain, but also allows for the customs brokers who work within that. So as it relates to processes and standardization, that for us is something that we're addressing, and we're addressing aggressively to move that forward. Your other question, please remind me. Oh, all right. So based on what Ms. Brown said and what you're also articulating, is that there is this apprehension in reporting certain issues. That has to change, and we will have to work on the mechanisms that we have in place, or buttress it in a more greater way, so that you have a level of confidence in reporting. It is important that we get the information, as Mr. Marlon Lowe had mentioned, because without the information, we won't know what is going on until we utilize other assurance mechanisms like our internal audit or our internal affairs that sometimes have to interrogate certain processes so that we know that there are certain loopholes that needs to be fixed. But where you report, there always are a level of channels, certain channels that you can go to. There's always the commissioner. There's always the deputies. There are always the senior directors for both Kingston and Montego Bay that certain information is channeled to. However, I get the feeling from based on the issue is that even when you put forward certain complaint, an officer probably perceived that that complaint was put forward by you, and that officer may interfere, and that interference with that declaration might result in a little delay. Can I say a little delay? Or a long delay? A long delay, all right? In the processing of your declaration. So it goes back to us ensuring that there are not just the standing operating procedures, but that there are time standards for each aspect of the process. And that is something that we are also trying to work with. So if you, and you are aware, if you send a declaration to the verification unit, you know how long it should take to be processed. And if you send it to the entry processing unit, you know what is our turnaround time. What it is that we need to do is to ensure that we are sticking to those times, and where those times are not being met, then the necessary sanctions are in place to mitigate against that. Because you want to, and we want to ensure that when you put through your declarations, your entries to the system, that it is coming out within a reasonable time, a time that we have given you a commitment to. So what we need to do is to ensure that those standards are in place, they are managed, and we hold our own team members accountable for that. So, Mr. Lowe, is there anything else?
Hard for me to find anything after that, Commissioner. But we are constantly looking at the processes, and I know Mitzi and Ms. Brown know that I'm personally aware of what they are speaking about because they have mentioned it, especially Ms. Brown here. And we can assure you that we are putting in mechanisms to deal with those type of issues. We also have anonymous ways of complaining as well. We have some means that also you can use, which will also help to protect you. But we are dealing with those issues.
So I take this opportunity. I think there is a little more to be added to this discussion about what's happening internally. And I'm going to make a comment, and I'll come to the Director for Risk Management and the Director for Investigations and Internal Affairs. But since we're streaming live via GIS website, etc., we'd like to take this opportunity to also invite those who are watching us online. If they have questions, they can post those questions, and we'll also have a chance to have the panelists answer those questions. So I'll first hear from Mr. Martin regarding risk management and the role that it is playing in Jamaica Customs, generally to improve our processes. And then I'll hear from Mr. Dunkley in terms of from internal affairs and investigations, if there are any initiatives to add to the Commissioner's input and the Deputy Commissioner's input.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. O'Neill Martin, Director for Risk Management. The role that we play in the Jamaica Customs Agency is a very critical one. Our stakeholders, the brokers, importers, exporters, expect that submissions of declaration, once submitted, are done in a timely manner. What risk management affords our stakeholders is that treatments that it's not the term that some person might use in Jamaica is a curry favor treatment. So one treatment that is given to one importer is afforded to the other importer. It takes out that element where persons can say, for example, what was just mentioned by Ms. Brown, if they complain about situations that they feel that they'll be victimized. So what risk management does is level the playing field for our traders. What we do also, the mandate of the Jamaica Customs Agency, apart from revenue, for collection of revenue, is also to secure the borders of the agency, the country, sorry, and that is a very critical role that we play. We partner with our colleagues in the JCF as risk management being part of Border Protection Division, which comprises several other units. It is very important. Some persons see customs as a revenue entity that's collecting revenue, which is important for the Ministry of Finance and for the wider country. But securing the borders is also very important, and our colleagues from JCF will tell you that things that are coming into the country also will affect national development, and the forum that we're having here speaks to corruption as well. So it extends beyond just revenue collection. So with a strong risk management focus for the agency, we have adopted that approach. Shipments, not all of our shipments can be examined, with proper risk management techniques being implemented and utilized by our team members, with training and for our team members. It will assist in terms of our low-risk traders being facilitated, faster clearance times, reduction in costs, etc. And for persons who who infringe our custom regulations, they will be dealt with accordingly. Those are some of the activities that we do. ASICUD has assisted us in terms of the automation that is afforded in terms of visibility. We are also looking at ways to improve what we have in the Jamaica Customs Agency, and looking at other systems to ensure that our mandate is fully met and our stakeholders are satisfied with the service that we deliver. As a risk management unit, our role is very crucial in that, as not only for revenue, but also for border security.
As it relates to internal affairs unit, we look at the persons that are inside customs. We look at from the vetting processes in terms of vetting persons coming in. We work closely with our counterpart from RPD, who also assist in that process. We have been embarking on getting our SOPs up to standard, because we, as my boss would say, that we hold leaders accountable, and it is imperative that we hold those that are up top accountable. Oftentimes we just focus on the persons below, and so the internal unit is also looking at that. When we have all our standard operation procedures in place, then we will hold persons accountable for breaching those standards. We also look at areas of vulnerabilities and see how best we can tighten those areas so you will not have an infraction again. There are certain strategic plans that we have, such as strengthening internal controls through re-evaluation of processes and procedures. We have identification of vulnerabilities through environmental assessment, develop a robust record management system, and that is across the agency. Revise and implement security vetting policies. So these policies are looked at, review constantly. Then continuous anti-corruption engagement with staff and provision of relevant tools. So we also we educate our staff as it relates to anti-corruption, how getting involved in corruption, how it affects them, how it affects the country. And we are not just here to get them, but also for them to be partner with us. Then engage the external stakeholders in relation to their roles and this relates to corruption, and this is one of the forum. So you as stakeholders feel free to pass on whatever information. Then we have the internal affairs at Jamaica Customs.gov.jm that you can be free to pass on whatever information that you might have. You don't have to say your name. However, when an allegation is made against an employee, you can appreciate the fact that a proper investigation will have to be done. Then there are times when persons make an allegation and there are certain things that will have to be done. For example, collecting of statements and all of that. Sometimes people make some things and they do not want to provide a statement, and that hampers the investigation, because irrespective of how one might feel, and Mr. Dirk Harrison is here, we cannot take a matter to court based on how we feel. There are certain principles that govern. And if we're taking a matter to court, we are not looking at to prove if the person is innocent or guilty. The investigation, the internal affairs, look at persons, and we look at what has been said and investigate to find the truth. Because if we investigate to see if John Brown is innocent or guilty, we might miss something. But if we investigate to find the truth, then as it is said, let the chip fall where it should be. So we investigate from that perspective. But we are also calling upon those who will report to do a little more, because we have to follow the law. And we can't just take somebody before the court and we don't have evidence. Evidence is critical. So, yes, you might report, but we have to make sure that the process is done transparently. In terms of we are customer focused, there's something, the core values of custom, we call it CAPIT, which stands for, it's an acronym, stand for customer focus. And changing the culture, it is very imperative. Hence, we have our customer relations side that is going about meeting the community. Because there's a lot of time the middleman out there, they take something and the customers do not understand the process of custom. Hence, the middleman will say, okay, let me do something for you. Oh, may I have to give custom something. And in truth and in fact, the custom don't have a clue of what has been said. But the person will go away and said, boy, we have to pay custom in order to get this. When in truth is the middleman. And so custom is working with our stakeholders assiduously to get rid of that middle person. And so educating the wider public about custom and its role, it is very imperative in also dealing with anti-corruption. Accountability, holding persons accountable for act of omission or commission. The professionalism, it is imperative that custom continues, and this will also minimize corruption when we act from a professional perspective. The I, integrity. Now, we all sit here and stand. We know that integrity is something that you learn from the first institution of learning, which is home. And if one don't have integrity, it is sad, but at this stage it's difficult to teach them. It is either you have integrity or you don't have it. Then the final one, the T, transparency. We want to make sure that whatever we are doing, it is transparent. And so even for our external customer, internal customer, which is our staff, we want to make sure that when an allegation is made against them, we do what is necessary and what is lawful. And so we liaison with our legal department. So we continue to develop streamlined processes in treating with disciplinary matters. We also have to make sure that if something is, an allegation is made against a staff and it is being investigated and the person is found guilty or whatever, it is done quickly so that the person is not within the agency remaining to either create further upheaval or further dishonest act, but to deal with it swiftly so that justice dealt with swiftly will also have an impact positively on the role that you have to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunkley. I have a question from our audience / stakeholders. And we still encourage you, if you have the slips of paper and you have questions, I'll soon go to ACP. And please forgive me, ACP, for not acknowledging your entrance. So we are really happy to have you. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue to engage with our customers and our stakeholders online. And very interestingly, online, they don't seem to be very focused on what we are discussing. They are typically more focused on having to do with duties and the fact that duties have to be paid and customer service related issues. And so what we say to the persons that are watching online, if you have experiences with customs that you are dissatisfied about, then there are various means at which you can use to contact us to have those resolved. And one of the most popular medium these days is the quick.response at jca.gov.jm. So just go onto our website and you're able to send your concern, your questions relating to duties, your complaints, your suggestions, and we guarantee a reply within 24 hours to anything that you post online. So ladies and gentlemen, there's a question that we have to the panel, and it is, what plans are in place to empower employees to speak out on corruption without fear of victimization? And I think that is a general question to the customs representative, but I think it's something that is also would be of concern to the other panelists. So who want to take first bite at answering that question? What is in place to encourage employees of customs, I think in this instance, and I guess the question will be applicable to public sector workers, to encourage whistleblowing? Are there any legislation? Are there any internal incentives? Are there any internal protection that encourages an employee to speak out if they are aware of acts of corruption? Commissioner, I've been told by the deputy that I should give you the microphone to answer that question.
Holding your leaders accountable, eh? All right, so what Mr. Henry didn't mention in terms of the other mechanism for persons to inform us is we have a customer relationship form, and that is online, that allows for whether internal or external persons to provide any information. It is there in three categories. One, as it relates to any queries, the other as it relates to information, and the final as it relates to corruption. Of course, the aspect as it treat with corruption, that aspect is dealt with in a very confidential manner. And we have in the past didn't really have any real issues internally with anyone who wants to speak out about corruption. Now, what certainly I have been doing is encouraging the team members to speak. I've always said speak frankly, but I do expect you to speak respectfully. Because if persons are in an environment where they are afraid to speak, you get nothing and you don't know nothing. And we need the feedback so that we can fix what is there to fix. So we have always been encouraging our staff to have that discussion. However, what we do not encourage is rumors and gossiping. And I can tell you that that has been something that has torn the agency historically. And we've even seen it in recent times where persons in an effort to vent will speak about others, speak information, whether in a written form or otherwise, that is untrue, that is malicious, that is disruptive. And so we have to manage how we receive information and encourage persons that whatever they're saying must be said where there is some amount of evidence to collaborate or corroborate that information. I can recall in the past where, as the former Assistant Commissioner of Border Protection, as they call it, some time ago in Customs, and I remember my Director Intelligence had said to me that nobody will come to me and tell me anything. And I said to her, why would you say that? And she was of the view that I shut away myself. And that was for a reason. And the reason was, the more you are available for rumors, the more you are opening yourself up for unwanted information. And as I meet with all the team members, what I ask for all the time is, if you have issues, give me the issues. But I also ask that where you can tell me of solutions, you bring forward those solutions and recommendations as well. Because that is how we fix whatever the issues are. When we allow for so much rumors and corruption, not corruption, but gossiping, I often say to the senior directors, is it that the team members don't have anything to do while they will find time for these things? And so it goes back to even management and how persons are detailed to do the enforcement work that we have to do and all the other border protection and trade facilitatory work that we have to do. And note I didn't say revenue collection, because if we get those two correct, then the revenue will follow, right? But it is more, from my side, a more trying to encourage, motivate, and to lead by example moderator on the issues as to how best we deal with that. So that is the take from me. In terms of the other aspect, to ensure that that is so formalized within our organization, it goes back to how we treated our own procedures within the organization, and that will come over time as persons see that we have strict adherence to the procedures that we set and allow for less discretion within the system. Even though from time to time the same discretion is what cause for some amount of the term corruption in the space, because what I call discretion might not be what somebody else calls discretion. So we have to be very careful with what we do, and goes back to ensuring that there are strict procedures in place that the team members follow.
Sorry, if I may, I think on another aspect, there's a Protected Disclosures Act, which is otherwise known as the whistleblowing legislation. It has under it certain provisions that treat with employee who wishes to provide information of some corruption, and it has mechanisms in place to protect the employees that if they believe they are being victimized, having provided information, about to give information, that there are mechanisms in place that they can report to. The report to mechanism mean persons in authority. What the act did is that it created a number of entities. The Jamaica Constabulary Force obviously is one of them, but under the legislation it had created, the minister then had designated the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption as a designated authority to whom protected disclosures could be made. I think we have to look at that now with the whole change of the law, the creation of the Integrity Commission. It listed a number of other entities on the schedule. I know the Director of Public Prosecutions, it listed FID, it had listed then the Office of the Contractor General. It had a number, a schedule, the Auditor General. So to answer the question more directly, the law in its wisdom and parliamentarians have put in place a law which has in it certain structures which seeks to protect employees. And I think a step further that persons need to go is that in every organization, it would be good to say to the head that we need to have an ethical officer. So at least you have this ethical officer that when you have concerns, you can also direct it in that direction to provide some protection. That person can be a voice to the other persons.
Within the JCF, we have the Inspectorate of the Constabulary, that a member can report any form of whatever it is. But also, we also have an ethical board that is set up when there are issues. So it is headed by the Deputy Commissioner in charge of administration. And then when we had the Anti-Corruption Branch, the Assistant Commissioner in charge of Anti-Corruption Branch, and there is also the Assistant Commissioner in charge of the National Intelligence Branch that sits, who sit on actually that that committee. So if there are issues that, let's say somebody made a report and that person feel that he or she is being victimized, they can appear before that board, and the person who is victimizing the individual, the allegation is made against, is also brought before that board.
Thank you, ACP Bailey. This time, I believe ACP Millicent Sproul of MOCA has a question or a comment.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me commend the Commissioner for putting on this conference. I have listened to everybody around the table. You spoke about fairness, you spoke about confidentiality, you spoke about some administrative tool as it relates to vetting and re-vetting. I am not too sure, it's not too clear in my mind as it relates to a hotline number. Commissioner, I am not sure either how robust is your public awareness campaign, Mr. Bailey made mention of his 34 years service in the JCF. I can mention of my 32 years service. What is my point? My point is that I've worked almost everywhere in the JCF, and I cannot recall being at town hall meetings, being at neighborhood watch meeting, and see anybody from Customs as it relates to their public awareness campaign. That is important because not everybody is reading the paper. Not everybody is on Facebook or Twitter, right? But when you go into some communities, some of the very persons who you're doing business with or who is doing business with you, they will come out to all of these meetings. So this is something you can think about. My next point is that I am not sure if there is anything in your agency as it relates to sudden staff lifestyle change. So that is something that we all need to look at. And that is my part as it relates to that. And the next thing is that I am not sure at the end of this, what is it we intend to do? It is good to have us here to give suggestions, to say what is happening in our departments, what we would have done, but at the end of all of this, what is it we intend to do?
Thank you, ACP Prowl. I think Mr. Lowe is taking the microphone because he intends to take a bite at at responding appropriately. I'm sure the commissioner doesn't mind her right or left hand responding.
I'm taking back the mic, and I know the commissioner will address some issue, but we do have one of our seminal communication mechanism is what we call Custom Meets the Community, a quarterly event which we have been going out there to the community. We have one scheduled for Clarendon shortly, but we have been in St. Ann, Portland. So we are going out and meeting the community. We have been doing that. We also, I'm aware that in terms of collaboration with the police and so on, we have had hotlines, corruption lines and so on. And when I say I called my person for the earlier, I just clarify that we do have some anonymous ways of communicating, including hotline, email, data form, as was mentioned. But I'll allow the commissioner to address some of these issues with. Sure, that can be provided. I know we had a corruption hotline number, which is a shared number with the police force and so on. But yeah,
Commissioner.
All right, so just to add, in terms of the robust engagement, you know, when it comes on to stakeholder engagement, that is something that we always have to improve on it as you go along. And so I think there is indeed a lot of focus as it relates to the print media and also social media. But social media, I have learned, is a tool that really is far-reaching. So don't discount it. It really is far-reaching. And so we try to bring the message in that forum as well. Mr. Lowe mentioned about Customs Meets the Community. Where we were the last time? Westmoreland. So when we do that parish engagement, is to the term ensure that we meet you wherever you are in the nook and cranny of the country, of our island. And I recall Miss Kenisha Morrison did an anti-corruption presentation, and that presentation was done to all those persons, including persons from the disabled community, which we made sure that they're a part of these things, because a lot of times we're so focused on what we call the able-bodied, and within the customs space, everybody interacts with customs, whether directly or indirectly. So we wanted a means in which we try to engage as best as we can to all. So within even that presentation, you would be, well, I was certainly pleased when I heard so many questions from the disabled community. And a lot of the questions surrounded really clearance of barrel. Yes, everybody seemed to be clearing barrel, right? And what we also found is that even though the issues were not directly related to customs, but we are a part of that supply chain of port players on the port. And so we help to share, in terms of the responding to all their issues and concern. We intend to continue that parish engagement because it is a fixed engagement on our structure. But we also take your suggestion as it relates to the Citizens Association. We, of course, try to speak with the returning residents because they also have issues. What we do is try to address the pain points within our processes and who are the ones making most of the complaints and try to address those in the forum. Just recently, even though we're going to Clarendon come the 31st, we had one of our staff in terms of an engagement with the Chamber of Commerce in Clarendon, and even speaking as it relates to what we're doing as it relates to anti-corruption, some of our operation processes, but mainly on the legislation, because we are repealing and replacing the custom bill. So we took that opportunity to continue the engagement. We are ensuring that whatever the flyers that we have are sent out to all the persons that need those information. But it is a continuous engagement for us, is continuous, and we will do everything we need to do. I realize that even as it relates to the budget, it has taken up quite a huge budget, but the returns, meaning stakeholder awareness and education, is far greater. And so for us, that is something that we continue to push. Now, you mentioned about what do we expect to gain. Now, this for us is another form of engagement, but an engagement of frank discussion. And you will find that sometimes, even when you send out some form of informal survey, the response tends to be more sympathetic in nature. So we are hoping that even within this forum, and this is what we're getting, the frank discussion to help us more with what is happening, and for us to put in the necessary solutions in place. Listen to what you're saying and utilize the feedback to improve and to make things better. So that is what, this is a start, and this is not really a start for us. We have been, on this campaign for a long while, and continue because it is important to us, and to not just in terms of building the reputation of customs and the image, because that is very key, but also say to the public that we're listening to you. We want to do better. We want to serve you better. We want to create a customs that has a reputation that the men and women of Jamaica Customs can feel proud of. I have team members who, regrettably, will tell people that they work with the Ministry of Finance. It happens. Because sometimes just to associate with the name, can be a problem in their minds. So I need to get that out, right? We need to eradicate that. And it's through these engagements, understanding what is wrong, and putting the necessary system in place actively for a better customs administration. All right?
Thank you, Commissioner. Before I take Mr. Dunkley, let me acknowledge a comment from one of our viewers online, Demar Gordon. And Demar's comment is, if you're going to talk about corruption at customs to the public, customs duties will have to be at the forefront. That affects the common man on a daily basis. And if you want to prevent persons from cheating the system, that's one thing that needs to be discussed and addressed. Mr. Dunkley.
I was just alluding to the internal affairs email address that anyone who have a concern or suspect of any officers might be involved. Internal affairs at customs.gov.jm, or they can contact us at 876-750-3020 or 876-385-9922.
Thank you, Mr. Dunkley. ACP wants to add something. Go ahead, ACP.
Yes, Commissioner. I did make mention of sudden lifestyle change. If that is observed in your department, is there something that, what do you have in place to address that?
I think for that one, ACP, is that we work closely with the other law enforcement entities. Now, you would recall that every person at a certain level in customs, I think it goes down to a clerk now or a cashier, has to declare. We have to declare our asset, right? And in that space, we also work with that entity that when that declaration is made, that in itself will highlight or flag any sudden change and allow for certain investigation to commence. Now, I certainly, as I will indicate to all the team members, is that we try not to, and for want of a better word, discriminate too quickly. So we allow a process. And Mr. Dunkley spoke about it in terms of investigate for the truth. So while the oversight is there, we work with it and allow for that process to take place. All right? Now, also understand that persons will look at customs sometimes, and I will say, I think I had a recent meeting with some of the team members who were recently promoted. And I said to them that when you look at customs personnel, if you look at some of the cars that we drive, right? And I'm saying we, because I'm a part of customs, that we drive, sometimes that in itself causes persons to look further on us. But what some persons don't understand, and I know the persons from the port will do because they feel it, and I'm putting this over now to Miss Valerie Campbell from the Kingston Wharf, is that customs work a lot of overtime. Yes? Long hours. All right, so my team member is correcting me. Long hours. And those long hours allows for overtime earning. Yes? And that accumulation allows for persons to also, if they're interested in a certain car, that's what they will buy. Yes? But again, I'm going to go back to our declaration of assets, that is a process that we utilize, that is mandated by law, and we trust that system and hope that it works. All right?
Thank you, Commissioner. We have another question from a stakeholder.
Good morning, everyone. Gregor Farquharson, Director Acting Revenue Investigation at RPD. Given that statements are voluntary, do you have mechanisms in place to treat with such an employee whose function impacts the enhancement of an investigation? I'm saying, given that statements are voluntary, that is in bringing a matter before the court, you would require statements. So given that the statements are voluntary, do you have mechanisms in place to treat with such an employee whose function impacts the enhancement of an investigation, where that person may refuse to give a statement?
Who wants to take a bite at that?
I am of the view, and we all take an oath when we start in the government service. We all have a job description. We are expected to do certain things. And let's just speak in a general sense, we work at Jamaica Customs. And we know that part of the job description is to detect, is to look at, is to undertake certain responsibilities. An investigation is conducted whether by the JCF or within, and certain irregularities are found. And in furtherance of those irregularities, an investigation is launched. I am of the opinion that an employee does not have the discretion, thank you, to decline to give a statement. And if you look at your job description, it speaks to somewhere down there any other function in keeping with your job functions. And if somebody is doing such, then that is where the investigator, I would not even say the investigator referring to the head of entity, the investigator needs to take it into his or her own hand there and treat with that person, because there are sufficient laws, I think, within the government structure that deal with it, and generally there are a number of common law offenses and other offenses that can treat with it. But I will just summarize and close by saying, an ordinary citizen who you engage on the roadway and ask them to, out of the goodness of their heart, provide a statement on X, can decline. Yet still a judge can say, send for that person, the person comes. A different matter, the judge can do it. But a government employee, to my mind, does not enjoy that wiggle room to decline. And if he or she does, I think it's a matter that should be taken from another angle.
Mr. Dunkley?
Well said. Well said. Also, custom officers have to realize that Section 250 of the Customs Act, by is it 250 or 251? By virtue of that section, it tells you that you're not immune from providing statement, although it doesn't say directly about statement, but the very fact of the content of the of that section tells you that as a custom officer, you might be called upon to provide a statement for court. Now, there's two types of statements, and for us, you have witness statement. Now, to witness ordinary witness, someone witness their co-worker doing something or whatever. And then you have the caution statement, you know, that the person is a suspect. Now, that individual, then you get the person get the attorney and you do a question and answer. So that one is different. But I think you're speaking specifically to the witness statement, right? So there are certain things. And we are trying to encourage those who are coming in and to speak to employers coming in to the agency, the importance of those things. And as the Honorable Dirk Harrison has mentioned about, what is it? I spoke to the very fact that speak about any other duties, etc. Then when we educate, and we are educating our staff about the importance of statements and all of that, and to let them feel that the Internal Affairs Unit is not here to get them. So we want to alleviate that type of fear, because if you have nothing to fear, there is no need to fear. All right.
Right. I just want to add to what Mr. Dunkley said. Sergeant Farquharson, who asked the question, is coming from a position where we at the RPD, not necessarily in customs, but in other government agencies, when we've gone to get straight technical statements from persons, system statements. Persons are refusing or delaying, causing delays in investigation in giving these statements. I'm not talking about nothing that isn't going to incriminate anybody, but you need to know what the process is. And usually, the sad fact is usually this is a functionary usually at a very high level, or at least at middle management level. And yes, there are other ways you can get it, but it frustrates the process and it slows down the investigation. And time in investigation usually of the essence.
Yes,
Sure.
Just a minute here. The fact that we are trying to get by December, is it right, Commissioner? By December of this year, we should get all our SOPs documented, because I think we have reached about 90% of it completed already. And the fact that you have standard operating procedure, some of the challenges that we have experienced in the past is that when you're investigating something and John said that this is how Tom taught him, and Tom said this is how Susan, and all of that, there's no standard, right? So you can't hold someone accountable. Now that we're 90% with that, you should not have much of a problem, because you can easily hold someone accountable for breaching standard operating procedures. And so that will assist us greatly.
Thank you, Mr. Dunkley. ACP.
Mr. Sykes said something earlier on about the court process and the time, the delay. And what I find is that a lot of people, once you tell them about court, they just have a problem and maybe we need to educate our staff a little more in terms of their role and their responsibility. And sometimes what I do, instead of I go to the person above the individual who I expect to direct the individual to do the statement. I think that might be a better way. It's not only in terms of government, anywhere you go, especially in our current reality, people are afraid to give statement.
And that has been our approach.
I think Mr. Brown has a question, but before Mr. Brown, just to piggyback on what you said, ACP, is that the idea of going to court sometimes cause persons to get very nervous and apprehensive. And we've seen that even in customs. So much so that we've said, listen, we have to relook our orientation process when persons are recruited into the agency, because you're not just coming for a work. You're coming for a work that involves law enforcement activity, representation at the court where necessary. And so we can't have persons avoiding this part of it. I've had seen a lot of applications to customs for job. And I recall saying to the senior management team, I thought the perception of customs is bad out there. Why am I seeing so many applications? You know, if it is that there is this corruption, is it that more persons want to be a part of it? Or is it that there really isn't any job around and persons are just searching? But if persons come inside here, they must know the mandate properly of the organization. And they must know that when they come, the job is one that I call a noble one that I call of a state agency that requires us being on the ports, at the borders, giving service. And we must ensure that persons, when they are recruited here and on orientation, are able to do that without fear or favor. So that is something that we're even working on. And it comes with the commitment and ensuring that that is embedded within our processes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Brown, before I take your question, we are in the final minutes of this panel discussion, and so we're going to take your question. And then I'm seeing one panelist that we have not heard from. So we'll hear from her, and then we'll ask for want of a better word, the heads of delegations to give brief closing remarks so we can round out this panel discussion. Mr. Brown.
Morning, everyone. The name is Lloyd Brown. I'm a custom broker. It's not so much of a question that I want to comment on, but more of a statement. Now, I realize that we're talking about corruption, but when I look back at the whole picture, if there's no justice in the system, then corruption, as AP Mr. Bailey said, you can't get rid of corruption totally. But then if there's no justice in the system, then it will only propel this thing higher. I realize that justice for the poor is different than justice for the rich. I've not seen in my time, and I'm over 50, where rich people are prosecuted. I mean, a man steal a mango and they take him down the drain. A man steal $1 million and you give him a white collar. So, until we reach a place where the powers that be need to put things in place that justice can be demonstrated at all levels, then we are still going to have a problem. We're still going to have a problem. So, when we talk about court, I mean, I come and I report something, and as a result of my report, I'm being penalized or sabotaged. Who is there to stand up for me, to support my efforts, to support my family in that process of what we do? So we must have some level of justice in the system. Without that, we're not going to go far. That's my say.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. ACP? I kind of see the movements which suggest you want to add something.
I am aware that politicians have been prosecuted, pastors, managers, directors. In my presentation, I made reference to selective justice. Remember, I made that, and that sometimes things can be skewed toward a certain population. But the reality is that we have prosecuted, and arrested. We can't, as Mr. Harrison said, we can't determine guilty or not guilty. But we put people before the court, and at the end of the day, it is left to the process. We have done a lot of them. Mr. Sykes at FID, significant persons have lost their assets because of activity that has been done. So, whilst people might have different views, but once the evidence is presented and we do investigation, we will prosecute people.
Thank you. The other microphone for Mr. Sykes, and then I'll come to you, Michelle.
Just in 2 sentences, I just want to say that often issues appear very black and white to the man on the street. But it is when you do the groundwork, collect the evidence, get the production order, gather it up, put it in front of a prosecutor like Mr. Harrison, as he was in his day. And then that is when you're going to determine exactly what you really have. To the man on the street, sometimes it seems very black and white, and it's everybody wants to say justice, but you have to understand, as I'm learning in only 4 years on this job, it is not as black and white as that. It is a lot of legwork. Witness don't want to talk, all sorts of things. It has to be packaged and put with that high degree of likelihood that the prosecutor wants. So we have to understand that these issues are not as simple sometimes as we think.
Thank you, Mr. Sykes. You want to make a
before-
comment, Mr. Morgan?
Right. One of the things I've always stressed to the investigators at the RPD is, listen, the man downtown, maybe living on the street, whatever, you treat him the same way you treat the person uptown when you're investigating. If you start from that premise, right, you're more likely to find the truth that you're looking for, right? Put together your case, put it before a prosecutor who will help to guide you and take matters through the court. If you don't start there, then you're likely to have certain biases being introduced. And so, that's one way we try to prevent that perception from continuing.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And so we have a panelist that we have not heard from. She's the director of internal audit. And Michelle, I just wonder if you'd just give some brief comments in terms of the role that internal audit is playing in terms of Jamaica Customs efforts to mitigate against corruption.
Good afternoon, everyone. The internal audit function in the agency is to provide assurance that our systems, our procedures are working, that there are controls in place to prevent, detect, and correct, prevent and detect fraud, and to correct any anomalies. In this regard, the internal audit unit, we conduct our audits, we examine the procedures, we provide our independent report to the commissioner on any deficiencies that have been identified. We have taken it a step further in implementing a monitoring system, because oftentimes they're identified and they may be treated once, but they recur. So we have now, and in conjunction with our other assurance partners, which is risk management and internal affairs, we have combined to develop a mechanism to monitor these risks and the deficiencies, and to ensure that these loopholes are corrected. As the commissioner had spoken before about the procedures, it's very important that the procedures are in place, because the corruption is able to thrive when there are inefficiencies. As several persons have noted, that persons want to go about their business, they want to lie, and if they think that the system is just and fair, everyone will wait their turn, and we will have less opportunities for persons to try and beat the system, because our controls are robust and are working.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senior Director. Ladies and gentlemen, sadly time has gone, but I believe we have accomplished a lot in our discussions this morning. So what I'm going to ask is that the heads of delegation, meaning Commissioner Customs, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Sykes, Mr. Morgan, and ACP Bailey, in 30 seconds or less, just tell us, where do we go from here? What's next? And I'll start to my left.
Okay. I think what is key now is that the conversation has begun. And I think the way forward is for us to continue our collaboration, working together. I believe in the concept of join up government. And so if we work together and we put our effort, I think that's the way we are going to combat. And critical to that is to empowering and building awareness in the public sphere. We need the public to be aware. Information must be made available to the public if we are going to combat this problem.
Thank you, ACP. Commissioner?
Thank you. So the cry is, we want justice. We want justice. And I said before when I started, from the anthem, justice, truth, be ours forever. And we need to meditate and reflect on that. But in going forward, we need to ensure, especially from customs, greater efficiencies, transparency, engender integrity, and have that collaborative work with all our law enforcement, all our border regulatory agencies to ensure that we're operating within a space that will give them the service that they deserve. When I speak about corruption, I speak not only about the corruptees, but about the corruptors. And the corruptors need to hear the message that we have no tolerance, but in order for that message to be there, they need to see a system where it is difficult to break through. Ladies and gentlemen, let's break the chain, and we have to do that in collaboration with each other.
Thank you. I endorse us working together. My first point is, let us start publishing your statistics publicly. Let us know that institution A has on it is to make $10 this year. They only made they made one. Let us let the public know where we're losing money. Two, let us continue to engage the young people. We have to do that. That has to be consistent, and everybody has to be a part of that. And as we did last year, we went into the prison. So it's not just those in the normal school system. We have to speak about those who are in the system, because they're telling you why they're committing the crimes. And finally, continue training for all the persons who are involved in the process.
All right, thank you. Our gentleman, I don't remember his name, Mr. Brown, your point, don't think that I'm not, I think your point is a fundamental point. And I really do believe in examples. Examples are important to really set the tone for people who are looking on. So I do believe, and we give our commitment around this table, that we are going to pursue those persons who abuse power. It's going to be done in partnership with all of us who are here. The second point I want to make is that as chair of the Anti-Corruption Committee here, relatively newly installed, many of the parties here are members, including a lot of external parties, law enforcement, private sector, Port Authority. We intend to take a very critical view of the measures that Customs is putting forward as its anti-corruption plan. The commissioner has put this team together. I know that she's expecting that we're going to be rigorous and test all of the things that the Customs team have put together and said, this is our strategy. We're going to test it, we're going to pick it apart, and to make recommendations. So we believe, A, in partnership, and two, we applaud the commitment of the commissioner and her team to actually let outsiders come in to look at the workings of Customs. Now, we can't look at every single thing, but we intend to, whatever is presented, the information presented to us, we're going to rigorously examine it and make some recommendations as to whether we think it's valid or not. So I give you that commitment. Thank you very much.
Well, as the last person to speak, I think my job is just to summarize what everybody else has said, really. I want to again thank the Commissioner for inviting us here. It's a step in the right direction. It's a very positive and public move. I think, as ACP Bailey said, what we need is to continue the conversation and to have deeper collaboration amongst all the law enforcement agencies, all the entities in this law enforcement infrastructure. I mean, the criminals are joining up and their gangs are associated with other gangs, so we need to gang up on them and work on that. All right. We as well need to engage with other stakeholders, non-government organizations, the private sector, the common man on the street. We need to engage with them. We need to go to the town hall meetings, as the ACP had mentioned. We need to have a deeper engagement with these persons. There was a question earlier regarding how to make contact or anonymous contact with if you wanted to report any concern that you may have. And I'd mentioned earlier that the RPD and the JCA and JCF have a relationship with Crime Stop. So that's always available. The Crime Stop number is 311, pretty easy to remember. There's also, the RPD also has a 1-888 number. Well, you know, in Jamaica you don't dial the one anymore, so it's 888, call RPD. It's an anonymous tip line you can call and give any information that you think is of concern. And of course there's always email. So again, Commissioner, thank you for the invitation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists. It's not my job to do the vote of thanks, but I'm going to have the Commissioner say something briefly, and in the meantime I ask Mrs. Selina Clark-Graham to stand by for the vote of thanks.
All right, thank you so much. So not to get involved in the work of the person to bring the vote of thanks, but as I take some of the commendations regarding this forum, I just want to especially acknowledge the internal affairs, and I ask that the team members stand, right? Because they are the drivers to help put this thing and make it a reality. So Kenisha and team, Mr. Dunkley, thank you so much.
Thank you. Mrs. Selina Clark-Graham.
ACP Bailey, Mr. Dirk Harrison, or moderator, Mr. Kingsley Henry, or esteemed panelists, other distinguished guests in the audience, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, all good afternoon. I deem it an honor to express thanks on behalf of our CEO and Commissioner, Mrs. Verma Ricketts Walker, the staff and organizers of this wonderful and prestigious function. Right? You agree with me? Good. A big thank you to ACP Bailey in particular for your frank and enlightening comments on the importance of creating the conditions to dissuade persons from taking a corrupt path. You spoke also of the importance of consistently defining corruption across all sectors, as well as the dangers of being selective in our approach to corruption. You also addressed how corruption disrupts our lives, destroys our country, and reduces the levels of investments that would flow. Mr. Harrison, you have always been with us. We appreciate your presence and your profound remarks. You reminded us of the consequences of being engaged in corrupt activities. You spoke of the path to take to tackle corruption. Firstly, we must determine the problem. We must, secondly, find the source of the problem, and then we'll be able to find ways to tackle and contain the corrupt practices. What can I say about our esteemed panel headed by our Commissioner and other heads of sections? You have demonstrated a strong grasp of the subject, and it reminds all of us that there is much more that we can do as members of this government of Jamaica, government representatives present here today, and it tells me that the discussion has to continue. To all our valued stakeholders, we appreciate your presence here today, members of the Custom Brokers Association, the shipping industry, everyone present, or port operators. Without you, this function would not have had, you know, the image, right, that we have experienced. Our media persons are here, and I must say that streaming live has brought the world to Jamaica Customs Agency. And it has shown a different side of customs, that we are here for you. We are here to face the hard questions and to provide responses. And we will go back and look at solutions so that we'll be able to make Jamaica the place to live, raise family, and do business. On behalf of all of us, thank you very much for being here, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Mrs. Clark Graham. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you to our online viewers, and it has been a wonderful day. Thank you. Refreshment will now be served. I have a question from